We're heading in.
What?
Oh, wow. When the place collapsed, I mean, whatever was attached to the ceiling, who would fall down too. That's an old formation. It's probably around 5 million years old. Wow. Don't go into the cave! There's demons in the cave! They're gonna kill you all when you go inside! Don't go into the cave! You're all gonna die! Where's my mummy? Tell me where my mummy is! Where is it? Where's my mummy? Where's my mummy? Where's my mummy? Where's my mummy?
Are we gonna make it?
What's going on, you guys? My name is Rich, and I am the Steel One. And today we are at the Cave of the Winds. We're gonna get a private tour. This is so awesome. We're so excited. And when I mean we, I mean Aiden from Aiden Escapades and Rachel, of course. We're so excited. This place is awesome. If you guys don't know Cave of the Winds, it's an underground cave, and it's gonna be like a 3-hour tour, although it won't be that long for you guys because that's way too long a video. But yeah, this place is great, and it's known to be haunted. There isn't any real stories about it that I've heard. Some tour guides have quit and left because it was just too spooky for them. And Anyway, even if we don't catch anything paranormal this time, it's gonna be awesome. You guys are gonna love it. These caves are incredible and they're beautiful, and yeah, let's do this, yeah. Hey guys, so we're about to start on the tour. Our tour guide is going to show us, or to give us some history of it. What is your name again?
My name's Kat. I'm going to be your guide, taking you throughout the cave here at Cave of the Winds, and I will be taking you through a separate cave system here at Cave of the Winds. It's called the Manitou Grand Caverns. And actually the cave first started off down below here. These two sinkholes that you see, these were discovered back in the year of 1880, and we had two young boys who went hiking out in Williams Canyon. Their names were John and George Pickett. Now these boys were only 8 and 9 years old. They were very adventurous. They were hoping to discover new things out in the canyon. But then they started to hear these ghostly howls coming from these two sinkholes. Basically what was happening, the wind was blowing over the sinkholes like you would blow over the top of a bottle. It makes a little whistling sound. The young boys, they hike up the wall to get a better look at the sinkholes, but underneath the sinkholes they actually found a crack going deep into the rock. Now at the time they had a candlestick with them, so they lit it and they crawled their way in. But about 20 feet in this small tunnel, the wind picked up, blew out their light, and left them in the darkness. So 8 and 9 years old, you can imagine how brave these young boys were. Exactly, whoa. They were terrified. They ran all the way back home to Manitou Springs, telling everyone of the haunted cave they discovered, and nobody really cared, nor did anybody believe them. Everybody thought they were just fabricating fabricating a tale. However, one gentleman did take interest in their story, and his name was George Schneider. George was very fascinated with caves, and so he hurried into the canyon armed with a shovel and a pickaxe. So he dug his way through the small crack, and it took him 2 whole days to break into the main area of Cave of the Winds. And this man, he saw a little profit. He could sell tickets to people and do tours of the cave. And basically it's a little moneymaker right here. Except this man didn't have 1 penny to spare to actually buy the property where the cave was. But he knew somebody who did. It was a gentleman whose name was Charles Reinhardt. Now he came all the way from Texas to Colorado to find his fortune here. He brought $2,000 with him. He was already a very successful businessman. So George offered him a little deal if he could lay down $1,000 to buy 80 acres of land where the cave was. George said he would take care of the cave and do the tours, and Charles, he would be administrative. He would handle the business matter over Cave of the Winds, and the 2 gentlemen would have an equal partnership over this business, share 50-50 on whatever profits they made. They agreed with these terms, so together they opened Cave of the Winds in the year of 1881. However, as you all know, when you mix friends and money together, or in this case, different families and money, these things, they just don't mix that well at all. It's written in the stars. They just don't work out. For these 2, it certainly did not. I'm going to continue more of the story once we make our way inside the cave. Right this way. And as for you YouTubers, I know you guys are looking through the cameras, but don't forget to look around behind you.
Right.
All the floors are uneven.
Totally.
Once again, my name is Christopher Mills, 96 years, 15 cameras tag wild passage.
You too.
At any point in time, you do not feel comfortable down here, and you would like back to that tunnel, have you stay in home for any reason, talk to me. There's one over here. I can use you again. But you are not stuck. That's very.
If you are taller than me, you will have a problem with this particular tunnel. I am a perfect height.
Rachel's not gonna have a problem.
Not yet.
Alright guys, try to stick to the right. We have a zero coming up.
We're slack
A little breather in this next room right here. Watch your head, low ceiling. Please remember, please don't limbo inside the cave. Only the ghosts are allowed to do that. Now, after George Schneider and Charles Reinhardt officially opened the Cave of the Winds to Manitou Springs, it's automatically very successful. So you see, Manitou Springs is actually the first resort town of Colorado. So there's a lot of rich people from the East Coast coming here, and they're spending $1 per ticket for a cave tour. Now, that's $100 in today's time. So yes, Cave of the Winds, automatically very successful. And George Schneider, he decides to celebrate his good fortune. He goes to the other side of the mountain where he does some victory hunting. He takes with him his favorite hunting rifle, along with a great big bottle of whiskey. This man clearly loved his whiskey, and after all, this was a celebration. He's halfway through the big bottle, and this is when he finally spots his first deer. He sees antlers peeking out of the bush. So he takes up his rifle, he shoots at it, then he hurries up towards these antlers. But when he's face to face with the thing, he finds out it's just part of a dead tree. That's how drunk he was. Now, he's by the tree, trying to rest up. He's kind of disappointed with himself. But this is when he notices on the ground by that tree, there's a crack where there's steam coming out of it. Now, he thought he just discovered some hot springs. He could renovate around there, open up a new hot springs business. People would spend money to see this. Basically, his luck has just doubled. However, this man knew how drunk he was. He knew he wasn't going to remember this little spot once he went back home to sober up. So he takes a bandana, he ties it to this dead tree, then he goes back home to sober up. And sure enough, next morning, big hangover, he completely forgets everything. And a year goes by before he does some more hunting on the mountainside there. He sees the bandana tied to the tree. That's when all the memories come flooding back to him. So he rushes to the tree. He finds the crack in the ground, but there's no steam coming out of it this time. He can feel cold air being seeped into it. Now, he worked in caves. He knew what this was. It's a little process for a cave called cave breathing, when it's trying to balance with the barometric pressures within itself with the pressures happening outside of the cave. So George, he knew there was a cave down there. He dug his way through, and he found a whole new cave system. These caves were much better than Cave of the Winds. So George, he decided to keep these caves secret. You see, at the time, he and Charles Reinhardt were now having a fallout between the two gentlemen. Basically, who was making more money, who should do more work, so on and so forth. And so George, he was tired of dealing with the Reinhardt family. He wanted to open his own cave touring business without them. So he kept the caves secret, and he worked on the caves, excavating them, renovating them for future tours. He did this almost every night. Now, by late 1884, this is when he approached the Reinhardt family. When the caves were nearly done, they were ready to be open to the public, but first he needed to have ownership over the cave. So he approached the Reinhardts and he told them that he was tired of doing cave tours. He didn't want to do them anymore. He just wanted to settle down, build a ranch, raise his family. So he offered the Reinhardts that they could have the other half of the profits over Cave of the Winds on the condition that George and his family could have 40 acres of land on the opposite side of the mountain where he wanted to build his ranch. And the Reinhardts are all for this. They were happy to receive 100% of those profits, so the deeds were quickly signed. And that winter, George, he finished up the caves. He even built his new ranch home on the mountainside. And so by March of 1885, he officially opened the Manitou Grand Cavern Cave Tours. And the Manitou Grand Caverns are going to be the caves we are going to go into for the lantern tours. I will continue the second part of the story further on. You guys are going to follow me down this way. So, as you can imagine, when the Reinhardt family discovered that George opened his new cave touring business, they were quite upset. George, he went behind their backs. He opened this new cave touring business, which was a new cave ravelry business that was basically in the backyard. Now, they wanted to get their share of the profits because they thought this little cave business was much better than Cave of the Winds, and in fact, it was. You see, the Manitou Grand Caverns, these caverns were big, open rooms. It only took you a couple of hours to do those tours. It was upright walking, and ladies loved this as they could wear their nice fancy dresses, easily walk through the cave. However, Cave of the Winds back in those days, it used to be an 8-hour belly crawling tour.
Oh gosh.
Yikes.
Absolutely. Also, for the Manitou Grand Caverns, you can take your horse and carriage right up the mountain road, be dropped off at the entrance. Cave of the Winds in those days, you had to hike through the canyon, go up a 50-foot one-step ladder, crawl your way through the small crack, crawl for about 15 to 20 minutes before you made your way into the first room. Also, to add insult to injury, George only charged 50 cents per ticket. It was half the price of Cave of the Winds. So basically, the Manitou Grand Caverns, it was easier, quicker, and cheaper. Also, George was able to do a lot more here in these caves. He was able to host parties in the cave. He hosted cave gala balls where the people could dance in here. They would listen to an orchestra play their music in those caverns. So as you can imagine, over time, the rich people who visited Manitou Springs, they're all going to Manitou Grand Caverns instead of Cave of the Winds now. As time goes by, Cave of the Winds loses popularity, and now the Reinhardts, they're losing business, they're losing a lot of money, so they wanted to get their share of the profits. So they went to a judge, and they claimed that some of the tunnels for the Manitou Grand Caverns, it went under their property line, so therefore, they should get some kind of share. The judge gave them more than this. He awarded the Reinhardt family full ownership over both caves. Now, George, he appealed to this judge for over 20 years. He never won a single case. And in the end, his debts mounted up on top of each other. He went broke. He was forced to leave Colorado forever. He went into California, and that was where he died in 1921, a broken man. Oh, I got more cheerful stories like that from the caverns. That's our happiest story on the tour. So these will be the lanterns that you're going to be given onto the tour, and everybody does have to have like their own lantern in order to participate on this tour. Now we're going to make our way into this first area right here. Through this iron gate, we're going to go into the first room.
She has a quick question. Nothing that's bad for people afraid of heights, right?
So there's no vertigo areas in here. If you're worried about looking down certain areas.
Because just even the stairs were a little unpleasant for me.
Oh no, you're not going to get anything like that.
Okay.
You won't get anything like that. Unless you get kind of a fear of looking straight up into
No, I think that's okay. It's just down.
No problem. So the first room we are going to go into, we do have to go through this iron gate here. And a little thing about this iron gate was actually our first access back into the Manitou Grand Caverns after 50 years when it closed up. So back in the early 1900s, the Manitou Grand Caverns was closed up, and I will tell you more about this once we were inside. And these caverns, nobody had set foot in it until in the late 1980s. The room we're standing in is called the Adventure Room. It was excavated in 1987. It opened up on Mother's Day in 1988. But during that time, workmen, when they were up here, they accidentally poked a hole through this wall. They opened it up, and a foul tomb-like smell came out. They wanted to find out where the smell was coming from, so they crawled their way through, and they found a series of tunnels making its way back into the Manitou Grand Caverns. But once they were in the middle of those caverns, the smell, it was so overpowering. They feared for their lives. They ran back through here, and they immediately installed this iron gate. Now, it's said throughout many centuries, throughout many cultures, iron repels spirits. And we want to make sure that whatever's back in here, it stays back here, because we don't want it to come out to interfere with our happy sunshine discovery tours. We're heading in.
All right, fam. Making us carry these dumb lanterns. That's what she said.
Now, the one thing people have to worry about on this tour is like phobias of darkness, phobias of closed-in spaces, and of course arachnophobia.
Oh no.
Oh, yes.
Well, at least that's like lower on my phobia list.
So, how did you all feel about the first tunnel you came through?
Good.
Good, because that was just the front porch. We are going to spend some time in here to rest up, and it's going to help our eyes to adjust to a candlelit glow. It'll help us to see a little bit better when we go through that tunnel. But in the meantime, right here, I'm going to tell all of you your first ghost story. In fact, this story is about a ghost who you most likely encounter on this tour, because she likes to grab your attention, literally. Her name is Nellie, and she was George's wife. She was one of the first people to attend George's tours after he opened the Manitou Grand Caverns to the public. Now, she loved the cave so much, she kept making repeated visits. These two shared a very unique love for caves, and that's how their own love relationship for each other blossomed. They fell in love with each other, they were married, and they did everything in the cave together. They did the tours together, they excavated the cave together, they did the exploring, they also had their picnics in here, they danced in here, they slept in here at night. These two shared a very unique, weird, and grotesque sense of humor. For Nellie, sometimes she wouldn't help out with those cave tours. Instead, she would take the time to hide herself throughout the cave. And without the light of her lantern, she would perch herself up on cave shelves like this, tucked away in the shadows. Or she would wedge herself down through small cracks, or hide away down in small holes. And when the tourists finally came by, she simply watched them. That's all she did. She just watched them. Well, she knew it was creepier than jumping out yelling boo. Now, should she make eye contact with a gentleman, she'd wink at them. Should a lady pass by, she reached out and pulled at their hair or tugged at the hem of their dresses. But the poor unfortunate soul in the back, she reached for their lantern, yanked out the candle, scurried away back in the darkness. You can imagine how freaked out everyone was by all this. But after all the chaos died down in the group, they would all hear a woman giggling in the shadows. This is how she had fun here in the cave. She thought these little pranks she was pulling, she thought it was hilarious and that she was just having fun with the people in here. George thought these pranks were pretty funny too, so he let her get away with them. Now, unfortunately for Nellie, when the Reinhardts and the Schneiders, they were having a fallout between the two families who had rightful ownership over the Manitou Grand Caverns, it got the worst of her, because when you live in a small mountain town, rumor, gossip, it spreads around very quickly. And so she couldn't go into town without somebody saying something very cruel to her. So one day, she snapped, she was put away into a mental institution. In the late 1800s, this is a terrible thing. You don't want to be stuck in that sort of place. But there she was stuck for 6 months before being released back to George. She was determined to start all over again. She never wanted to have to go through that ever again. So she put her heart and soul into the work of the cave. Now one night in the ranch home, she's finally sleeping peacefully, but George was restless that night. He couldn't get to sleep, but he didn't want to disturb his wife, so he made his way into the cave to do some work. This was normal for George and how he would pass time. However, later that night, Nellie woke up, and when she found George gone, she starts looking for him. Their search made her way no further than just outside the cave entrance. Out there, they had their own little private gift shop. So she goes into the building, still unable to find George. She becomes frantic, and now she needs to distract her mind. She just begins cleaning the place. She swept the floor, she dusted the shelves, she starts polishing up all those souvenirs. But then she came to the windows. And there was one particular window that overlooked the cliff down below. She had no idea that it was unlocked. So as she's cleaning everything, basically she's putting a lot of pressure, a lot of force behind her cleaning, because technically she's trying to wipe out all these thoughts that are going through her head. So when she comes to the window, she puts her body pretty much forcing it right up against the glass pane. It swings open, she leaned forwards, she's tumbling out. She falls 100 feet down into the canyon. So when George came back out of the cave the next morning, he had no idea what happened to her. He searched for her all day long after he came back out of the cave. He eventually found her in the canyon, dead. No changing this law here. So please, when you bang your head, cry out rock. No other four-letter words, please. Might still be a private tour, but this is still considered to be a family tour. Now, number 2, fire is hot. Now, on these tours, we are known to huddle closer together for safety in numbers, but if you start to feel if your part of your body heating up real quick, turn to the person who came to you with that lantern, just politely ask them to back away. And if they don't, you're free to blow out their lantern, because you are obligated to keep your personal space. And number 3, crack kills. And we want to avoid this at all costs. So to prevent this, you're going to take your thumbs, thread them through your belt loops, and pull up those pants.
She's talking to you, Sarah. And Rachel.
To see your baby cave crack as we do the duck waddle squat position. Right up this way, guys. And this is where you are going to have to be careful. So just watch your steps here. And here's where the crouching really gets heavy. Oh yeah. You are going to have to watch out for that because of your bag. Now, sir, when you see me standing directly straight up, I'm a bit smaller than you, so don't be fooled.
I don't know why, but I thought we were going to have like headlamps. Headlamps?
Oh, that's caving 101.
Oh.
Oh, that's cool.
And that's where you're belly crawling through the cave.
Oh.
Kind of glad that it.
We got another tour to do, Rich.
Yeah.
You might see a caving 101 later at the very end of our tour because there is one at 4 o'clock.
So I wasn't recording, but she was telling us about this ghost lady who, guys, just pay attention to like the cracks and stuff and shelves and underneath, because she'll like show her face. So ouch.
And just another note, don't turn right. That's a message back to your friends.
Don't turn right.
Come on, I want to go right.
So what's right?
Don't turn right.
Okay.
This is so like the cave I want to find.
The cave you want to find?
Yeah.
Alright. So good news, guys. We're out of the Windy Passage Tunnel. We made it through. We are now standing in the Manitou Grand Caverns. Bad news is, if you ever want to see the light of day ever again, that tunnel you just came through, that's our only way back out. So we do have to go back through that tunnel one last time. But we have some time to rest up here in this room before we do have to make that journey. Now you all remember the first don't turn right that was down that tunnel, the great big tunnel that had a metal post in front of it? We used to tell a story on what happened down in that tunnel as soon as we came out through the Windy Passage, but too many people found the story too horrifying to even continue with the tour. They've demanded to be taken out of the cave, And so new Cave of the Winds policies, so we don't lose any more people in these tours, we're no longer allowed to tell you the story after coming through the Windy Passage. We tell you just before we head back. So you folks have no choice but to listen to all of those ghost stories, including that last one just before you have to head back to that tunnel. Now please remember, you gotta use your lanterns like a flashlight, and you also have your regular lights up ahead. There's another wacky staircase up ahead, but it's making its way down into the next room. So remember to shine your lights down on the ground. It'll help you to see what all the steps are. Right this way.
So that means that you guys have to stay tuned in to find out what that story is.
That's totally what I was gonna say. Stay tuned to the end so you can hear that spooky story. I better turn the camera around or I'm gonna trip and bust my ass.
Little baby steps before we get to the steps. This is nothing like that cave we found up at Goldman Beach.
Oh, yeah.
Grand Caverns. You can see it collapsed in 1921, shortly after George's death. Now, the Reinhardt family, they couldn't dig it out. They had no choice but to dig a new one, and it's the one you see on the lower left-hand side of the square rock. So it took them time and a lot of money to complete, but when it was finally completed, it collapsed. The Reinhardts made no further attempt to come back into these caves, because it was said that George's spirit was now making claim on his cave. And as I said, no human ever came back into these caves for over 50 years until in the 1980s. So we believe we have a minimum of 2 ghosts in here. One of them is Nellie, who is constantly seeking for your attention, but the other is George, and he's not interested in your attention. He's more focused on his cave here. But a lot of people say they see a man in overalls, he's got a mustache, sometimes he's carrying a bundle in his arms. And he's making his way down some of the dark side tunnels here, like this one here. They watch him disappear into the darkness, and they say he's just completing his tour here in the cave. The man was forced to leave behind here in the cave so long ago. So let's go up this dark side tunnel, shall we?
1 second, please. My cameras are having... 1 second, hold on. 1 second, please. 1 second. 1 second.
Please don't go with that.
This is our way for you all.
I'm going with her.
You gotta do more than this. You gotta do more. I'm being messed with.
On these tours, you learn the slow person here, you leave them behind.
That's all right. I'll slow it down. Oh, God. Yeah, sorry. My stuff is being messed with. Now my SD card is full. Thank you for the lights, eh?
Yeah. I don't know if you guys can see it, but you can see Aiden's breath.
It is a little cold down here, isn't it?
Not really.
Yeah,
I thought it was going to be colder.
Kind of weird.
How can we see our breath if it's not that cold?
I don't know. I'm seeing your breath.
Basically, the caves have higher humidity rates.
Oh, okay.
What?
Oh, wow. That's huge.
When the place collapsed, I mean, whatever was attached to the ceiling, who would fall down too. That's an old formation. It's probably around 5 million years old.
Wow.
Wow. Seems like yesterday.
Seems like yesterday. Oh, how the time flies.
Yeah.
Now, I actually got a little spot for you. Why don't you come with me?
Special spot for me.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm jealous.
You guys stand here.
Okay.
Go ahead and stand there. And so you're facing us, your lights are shining this way so we can see where you are and you can see the rest of us. Your back is completely facing that dark tunnel. No, you're completely facing that dark tunnel. Shine no lights down there. You don't want to antagonize whatever may be down there. So you're going to stay there until it's time to move on to the next room.
Okay. You guys gonna leave me?
Now, George Schneider, he was a showman, and he would do everything and anything to attract more people into his cave. We actually found old brochures of his. He was advertising the Native Americans dancing outside his cave entrance for live entertainment, and he also had something called fire-eating monkeys. Don't ask me what that was. I have no idea, but it must have been pretty cool to see. However, this sort of thing wasn't enough for George. He always wanted more. Now, he had a brother who worked in a quarry just outside Red Rock open space. And his brother dug up in that quarry 3 naturally mummified bodies. They were believed to be of Native American origin, and they were lifted out of their sacred burial. Now, when George heard about this, he had to have one for his cave. So he talked with his brother, $5 exchanged hands, and he was the proud owner of his very own cave mummy. Well, you thought Nellie had a weird sense of humor? So George brought the mummy into the cave, wrapped some rope around the poor thing's neck, and he hung it here, where you see this bit of rope is now. He had a great big curtain covering it up, and so he made everybody on the tours think that they were about to see some kind of fancy cave formation. But as they lined themselves up on the walls, George would look at it all real blank. And slowly approach it, as if terrified of the very thing that was hiding behind the curtain. Slowly reached up and pulled it down. Behold, the cave mummy! Oh yes, dramatic he was. And everybody, Victorian times, you can imagine what their reactions were when they saw that horrific thing hanging there. Ladies shrieked and fainted to the ground, men dropped their lanterns, running for their lives. George Schneider couldn't breathe. He was laughing that hard. He got them good every time he did that little bit with the cave mummy. But one day, he actually gets a group of college boys on a tour. They're talking a lot of smack about his cave. Because you see, when you went to college back in those days, you were rich, you were snobbish, you were rude. These boys were being very rude to George, and so he was determined to make sure they understood who was king of the cave. So he does this little bit again. He gets them all lined up along the wall, and he stands in front of the curtain, giving them a wild look. He reaches behind him. Behold, the cave mummy! They did exactly what you're doing now. Stood there, awkwardly, waiting for something to happen. And George, he was confused by this reaction. He never got this sort of reaction before. So he turns around to look at his mummy, but all he sees is that bit of rope. His mummy was gone. It was stolen. Now George, he looked at the young boys and he got it into his head that they were the ones responsible for the theft, since they were the only ones there that day. So he's going up to each of them. You! Where's my mummy? Where's my mummy? What did you do with my mummy? He asks each and every boy the same question, but they're not answering him because they have no idea what he's talking about. The whole cave mummy bit here was supposed to be a surprise, so they're not answering him. And since they're not answering him, oh, it's making George mad. Where's my mummy? Tell me where my mummy is. Where is it? Where's my mummy? Where's my mummy? Where's my mummy? Where's my mummy?
She's gonna come up behind me.
Oh yeah. Good call.
Should I do it?
Where's this way?
Tourist this way.
Nice. Waiting.
So unlike me, who waited for you to catch up, George Schneider, he took off down this dark tunnel, never came back for those group of boys. After 2 hours of waiting, they had to make their own way out of the cave. And fortunately for you guys, Cave of the Wind rules. I'm not allowed to do this sort of thing. You can follow me down this tunnel. Now, in the tunnel, there is water still dripping from the ceiling. So if you feel a water droplet hit you, don't freak out. We call it a cave kiss. It is said to give you 5 years of good luck. And we also have the cave spider in here. It's called the lampshade spider. It's related to the daddy longlegs family. They like to hang out in this particular tunnel because there's a lot of nooks and crannies they can hide out in here. So if you feel something drop on you, but then you go to wipe it off and it's not wet, well, consider that lucky you're not.
At least there's nothing high. The ghosts and the spiders don't bother me that much.
It's leaving us. Huh. Damn.
Steps. There's a wooden block there in the middle of that bridge, so just watch your step. Talking to those who have their eyes on cameras.
Yeah, don't trip there.
I've done this tool far too long.
I did it that.
Did you do it anyway?
Yeah, I did it anyway. She warned me about that.
Standing in, the room is called the Grand Opera. Lovely little acoustics in here. George heard these acoustics, wanted to use them for the benefits of his tour, and so he named the place the Grand Opera Hall. He would have live orchestra pits come in here to play music for his tours. They would be tucked away in this nook. George had already set up a wooden platform so they could set themselves up in there, and people would come into the cave on the weekends, and they would dance the night away in here. This is where George would host his cave gala balls. It's where he had his parties. So you can imagine you could easily walk into this cave without getting dirty, dress up in your fancy best, dance the night away in here. However, it's a little hard to do a waltz, let alone a do-si-do with your partner, when you're trying to hold a lantern at the same time. You can imagine the complications here. Now George, he had a solution for this. He would hire young boys from Manitou Springs. These young boys had only one job to do during these parties. They were lantern boys. They would hold up lanterns so the patrons would be able to see. They couldn't move. They had to stand still for 3 to 4 hours long. These are adult young men. They can't stand still for 5 minutes. That's what I thought. You see, George already knew this was a bad mixture, putting young boys, put them in adult parties. Boring! They didn't want to stand around all night long. They wanted to run off and play. And to a young boy, a child is the perfect place to play hide and seek. George had to drill it into all of their heads before every party. They could not run off. He hadn't fully mapped out the whole cave system yet. There were still tunnels that needed to be explored. But boys will be boys. What these young boys would do if they got too bored, which they always did, they would take their lanterns, set them down on the ground so the patrons would still be able to see. And then they would run off down these dark tunnels to play hide and seek. But at the end of the ball, they would always come back, because the end of the ball was basically payday for these young boys. Basically, the patrons would go around to them, tipping them a coin each, thanking them so much for standing up all night long, holding up those lanterns. However, there was one particular party, and it stretched on far into the night, up into the early hours of the morning. 2 young boys who were well known for running off, they got restless. They couldn't stand still anymore. So they took their lanterns, set them down on the ground, and ran off down their dark tunnels to play hide and seek. An hour went by, the party finally ended, but these young boys hadn't returned yet. Their lanterns were still resting on the ground. Now the patrons saw the lanterns, they remembered the young boys, and so they asked George where they were, because they wanted to tip them. So when George saw the lanterns, he knew which boys were gone, and he quickly dismissed the whole thing. He explained that these young boys were always running off, they could never stay still, they were always disobeying him. In fact, George, he was quite certain these boys weren't even in the cave anymore. He believed the boys just gave up on their job. So they left the cave. They went back home to Manitou Springs. They were now safe and sound in bed. And everybody accepted this excuse. George left with everybody else, and he sealed off the cave, and then he returned back home to go to bed. But the next morning, there's angry parents pounding away at his door, demanding answers. They demand to know what became of their children. Of course, George was alarmed by all of this. He had no idea that they hadn't returned home. So he, with Nellie and the parents, they go into the cave and they search high and low in here. They call for these young boys, calling them, hoping that they'll answer so they can find them. Where are you? Come out! Where are you? And only silence answered their calls. The boys completely disappeared off the face of the earth. But a lot of people swear their spirits are still here in the cave. Some people can hear children's laughter hanging heavy in the air. It sounds so close, but at the same time it sounds so far away. Other people witness orbs of light, always 2 of them dancing together down the dark tunnels. Others will feel a gentle tapping on their shoulder. Basically, these boys are enticing you to go and play with them because they want a new play partner in here. But whatever happens, don't ever follow them. Always stay with the group because these young boys are already lost in a different world. And you don't want to be as lost as they are. So we're going to continue down this dark tunnel right here. Before we do, I actually if you want to shine your light down on the ground here, this is actually a pretty important spot that we are not going to walk on. So it's a cave formation of flowstone. So it's made when water drips from the stalactites up here, the water falls to the ground, and then the water is now flowing down the floor. This has been going on for millions of years. This cave formation is millions of years old. It's also wet, it's slick, it's also very fragile, so we're not going to walk on it. All right, come ahead. Keep my light on the flowstone too, so you can clearly see where it is. And just make your way over to the There we go. The reason why you want to stay ducked, there's a low-hanging stalactite on the other end. Yeah, he ain't fun.
It's a spike right there.
Just get over to the fence. It's a little safer there. Just kind of hang out right there. Now this room, it's called the Grand Concert Hall. Now before George had opened the cave to the public, while he's still exploring this particular area, he's crawling up along this cave shelf. With him is his baby brother Elmore. And the two of them together come to that very large cave formation that you see on the wall there. Now Elmore, he accidentally struck one of those stalactite formations. It made a musical note. Now, Elmore was proficient in music, so he experimented around up there. He discovered all those stalactites were hollow in the center, and each one is of a different size. So each one, when you tap it, would make a different note. In the end, he could actually play that cave formation as if it were a real working musical instrument. It's called a cave organ. And North America only has two. The other one is in Luray Caverns, Virginia. We have the other one right up here. Now George, he had another idea for his tours. He named the place the Grand Concert Hall because this was a place where everyone would hear a concert being given by Elmore. So everybody would come in here, they would line up along the fence, and Elmore, he would make his way up this ladder and platform. George put these things here for his baby brother's safety, as he wasn't as proficient as going up and down rock walls as George was. Elmore would stand by the cave organ and he would play several different music pieces up there. Now, as time went by, he's very proficient with the cave organ, and Elmore knows all the safety hazards of where he needs to stand on the platform and where he should not stand. So one day, there's a group of over 30 people here on a tour. They're all gathered up by the fence. They're watching Elmore play away on the cave organ, but halfway through his concert, the poor man suddenly goes flying off that platform. He tumbles across the cave shelf, and he lands on the ground on top of his head. Crack! That crack was the sound of his neck snapping in two. But he survived all that. He was taken to a hospital in Colorado Springs. It took him 10 agonizing days to die. During this time, friends, family, they're visiting him, and with each visitor, Elmore always says the same thing to them. I was pushed. Always the same three words. I was pushed. And everybody dismissed his words as crazy ramblings. I mean, after all, the man landed on his head, he had concussion, he was delusional, and everybody knew that he was the only one up on that platform. Nobody could have pushed him off. But on his last day, George is by his side. Now, these two shared a love for each other, only brothers could understand. So George, he's looking into his baby brother's eyes, and this is what Elmore says to him with his dying breath. I was pushed. So George finally came to realize, if Elmore said he was pushed, then he was pushed. And if you think about it logically, if he made a misstep on that platform, well, he would have fallen near the ladder. Now, he questioned all 30 people who were there that day if they'd seen anything before, during, or after the incident. No one saw anything suspicious. And so George concluded he was a cursed man. Because you see, all this happened after the disappearance with the cave mummy. So George came to believe the mummy's spirit was now seeking revenge upon him and his family for trapping it in the cave. So let's go further into the cave. Now, first off, the name of this place is called Card Hall. And the state abbreviations you see painted up here, these were actually painted by George Schneider himself. He had a lot of people from out of state attending his tours. Now, should these people be carrying a business card or a calling card or some kind of small trinket that they were willing to leave behind? They were to take those items and leave them under the stake and where they came from. Now, at the end of the day, George would come in and check out Card Hall, and should there be some states lacking items, well, he knew he had to do more advertising in that state. This is your early version of Google Analytics right here. Now, there is a certain region of states purposefully missing from this cave wall. Can you guess which region? Give you one little hint, it was a region of states most hated by the U.S. in the late 1800s.
Texas.
Oh, what region is Texas in? The South. All states that were part of the Southern Confederacy during the Civil War. You see, George Schneider was a Union man through and through. He hated all those who came from the Southern states, including those from Texas. Remember, Charles Reinhardt was from Texas. George had a lot of bad dealings with him in the past. And in the end, he took away George's precious cave. George believed all Texans were black-hearted. Now, should these Southern people come into the room and then they wanted to leave their business cards down, but they couldn't find their states up here, then they had to ask George where they could put their cards. Well, George would point to a little old pit up ahead. He told them that they could toss their cards in there and then to do them a favor, jump in after it. And to this day, we call this pit Texas Pit. And this pit doesn't get its own unique story until several decades later. In October of 2012, we get a particular lady in on one of these tours. And since it's so close to Halloween time, she's convinced the tour is going to be your classic haunted house. Now, she thinks there's people hiding around in here. They're dressed up in scary costumes, and they're hiding behind rocks, around boulders, in corners. Jump! Now, you guys see how slippery it is in here, right?
Yeah. Whoa.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's the reason why we're never going to do a haunted house in here. Because you don't know what somebody's going to do when you jump out and scare them. Because they could jump and they could slip and hurt themselves. They could try to run away in the darkness and hurt themselves. They could hurt somebody else in the process. They could hurt the cave. Now, the tour guide explained all this to the lady, and he assured her that the only scary thing happening in here was just the ghost stories. However, she didn't believe him. She was fully convinced somebody was hiding in this cave, waiting to scare her. So throughout the whole tour, poor tour guide stories are constantly being interrupted. This lady's going around behind every rock, around every corner. She's looking down every hole, and she's interrupting the tour by giving out loud cries of, "Aha! There you are! Come on! I see you!" Well, it's quite irritating to have somebody like this on your ghost walking tour. I mean, the poor tour guide, he hasn't been able to complete a whole story all the way through without her interruptions. So once they're here at Card Hall, he draws her aside, and he tells her if she really wants to find somebody, she should go up to Texas Pit and look down. Now the lady hurries up there. She's hoping to actually catch somebody this time. But the tour guide, he just wanted her distracted so we could at least tell one story all the way through without any types of interruptions. So when she makes her way up there, he turns to the tour group and he starts talking about Card Hall. But then, the lady interrupts him. "Aha! I knew there was somebody in here. You come out of that hole right now. You're not going to scare me today." Only one lantern tour at a time is supposed to be here in the caverns. Everybody shines their light over by the pit to see what this woman is talking about. Now they see her reaching her hand down into the pit as if to help somebody out. This hand reaches out of the pit and grasps hers. The hand and arm is as black as coal, and she starts to drag out a body. The head comes into view for her, so she shines her light into this person's face. This is when she starts freaking out. She starts screaming non-stop. She drops the hand, she drops her own lantern into the pit, and she runs down this tunnel like a madwoman into the darkness. The tour guide is chasing after her, trying to find out what happened, what went wrong, but she's not answering him. She doesn't stop until she comes to that ladder. She trips and stumbles in front of it, and now she's on the ground. She's huddled in a little ball, and she's sobbing. Crazy. The tour guide, he left her over there, supervised with a couple of other people, and then he rushed back to the pit because he saw her pulling somebody out. So he assumed somebody from the last tour had wandered off, they'd gotten lost, and now they were stuck in the pit. But when he shone his light down in there, it was completely empty. Only the woman's lantern was down there. It was empty of life. And there was nobody else down there. It's only 7 feet deep. The only way you can get in or out of that pit, you have to come through this room here. Now, an hour went by when this lady is finally escorted out of the cave. And everybody's hoping once she's in the gift shop, sunlight, fresh air, it'll help her to calm down and see reason. So what she sees other happy tourists waiting for their turn to go into the cave. Now, she thought it her civic duty to warn everybody about the dangers in there. Don't go into the cave! There's demons in the cave! They're gonna kill you all once you go inside! Don't go into the cave! You're all gonna die! So as you can imagine, nobody wanted to go into the cave after this. Mean, loving husband with a wife, adorable children, ready for a nice adventurous tour of inside the cave, but then suddenly this is coming out at you? Everyone said no thank you, refunds were handed out, and we ended up closing the cave early that day. Business, it became that bad for us for a month. Until this woman emailed us. Now, she apologized for her behavior, and she said she was sorry that so much damage befell Cave of the Winds. But she said we had to seal off the Manitou Grand Caverns because this area was too dangerous to allow people to come in here. Now, the manager at the time, he responds to this lady, and he tries to reason with her. Ma'am, what you experience, it's quite normal. The darkness in here is quite normal for people to hallucinate and see things in here. But please, we'd like you to come back. And we'd like to have a camera crew with you. We want to record the same experience, maybe get whatever happened to happen again. Again, she said no. No amount of money will ever bring her in here. And she warned us again that we had to seal off the caverns. And she reminded us it was George Schneider's spirit who sealed off the cave in the beginning, not to keep the Reinhardt family out. It was to keep the demonic spirit of the cave mummy trapped inside, so no one else would suffer the same curse he did in life. This woman's experience was so terrifying, she vowed she would never return to the state of Colorado.
What is that, mold?
It is a little bit of mold. See, sometimes the tourist stuff's so scary, people throw up in here. And try to clean up. But any kind of human bacteria that can get in here, it can mold. So I know to go back there and work on that. That's my other process as a tour guide. We clean up code yellows.
Can I touch it?
I know. I smack you.
She said you can't touch it.
Well, and she said she couldn't walk on it.
Walking around it doesn't mean touching it. Alright. Now we are going to go down our most paranormal hotspot within our entire cave system. This tunnel right down here. It's called Lover's Lane. This is where George and Nellie spent romantic evenings together here in the cave. And yes, the most terrifying place within the whole cave, Lover's Lane. I don't want you to go in. Now, it's said to be bad luck for a single person on their own to lead a group of people down this tunnel. I need the volunteer of a romantic couple in the group to lead the way for all of us.
Hey,
Now, hold on. So I'm just going to give you little instructions as you guys go down here. Now what I just told you in the beginning, that was complete crap. I'm actually sending you down here as bait to make sure it's safe for the other half of us. Go down there. Now the tunnel is straightforward. It's just one big tunnel. There's no other tunnels in there. So you can easily walk through it, but up ahead it is going to narrow down in the shape of an old-fashioned keyhole. You will have to squeeze through that area one at a time, but right after that, tunnel opens right back up. So continue down the tunnel for just a short ways. You will stop in front of a wheelbarrow. It's this great big hunk of metal pretty much parked right in the middle of the tunnel. Just stop right in front of it. That's where we catch up with you guys. And what usually happens to people in this tunnel, it either happens just before the keyhole or immediately right after it. So I will watch you guys. If you pass the keyhole all right, I know it's safe for the rest of us to follow you.
Let's do this.
We're going to let them go first. I'm just going to kind of stay in the back here. What do you have, sir?
Ooh, that keyhole.
We send them on first to make sure it's safe for the rest of us.
Ah! Is it? This is where we're supposed to stay? I wasn't listening.
No.
Okay.
Aiden's ruining the moment.
What's happening?
Oh, his 420 alarm went on.
Sheesh.
Aiden's alarm kind of ruined the moment.
Yeah. Way to go, Aiden.
Sorry, sometimes I need to exhale loudly. So, when the cave was sealed off, when the tunnel entrance collapsed, everything that was in the cave, it remained in here. So when we rediscovered the cave, we found remains. Basically, we found this old wheelbarrow, and around it we found some broken lantern pieces. We put them around in here, some old shovel bits. Put them all right in here. This is basically the artifacts of stuff that was here from the cave well over 100 years ago. Now we put the wheelbarrow right here because we want to keep the rest of the cave tunnel here preserved for historic reasons. As I said, this is where George and Nellie, they spent their nights together in here. So when their parties went too far off into the night, they would just camp out in here. They wouldn't make their way back home. And further down the tunnel, get my light here. So can you kind of see a couple of divots all the way in the back, digged into the hole, dig into the ground?
Yeah.
So that's where they dug it out, they filled it with straw, and that's where they had their pillows. Now in that little tunnel entrance, they had a great big blanket covering up that area, and it would preserve their heat in there, so it was better than trying to build a campfire. It is said that Native American spirits, Native American people never came their way to the cave, but a lot of people believe that spirits of Native American folklore actually still reside in the cave. In fact, if you want to know a little personal story, one of our tour guides who worked here during the summertime, he's Navajo. And he came into these caves, and he has a sister who is actually a professional medicine man. She came by the cave, and she already knew her brother was in danger. There were spirits here after him because he wasn't a local Native American of the area of Colorado, Navajo being from New Mexico. So she made him a special onyx arrowhead, and it would protect him. So every time he would come into the cave, the arrowhead would fight back. Any kind of chip or crack in there, it meant he was being protected. His first 2 tours inside the cave, it got chipped very badly, and then the third one, there was a crack all the way through the arrowhead. It was still connected, but there was a long line going right through it. And after that, he wasn't bothered anymore. So guys, we are ready to make our way back through the cave. So up these stairs and into the darkness is where the windy passage tunnel is. We're ready to make our journey back through the cave. After after I tell you the last story I told you about. Now, the tunnel I told you about, if you were to go down that tunnel, it would take you to a room called the Fairy Bridal Chamber. That was a room where you used to get married here in the cave. And a couple came on tour in 1901. They adored the idea of being married in here. Their names were John and Abigail. They were childhood friends. They'd grown into sweethearts. They had been planning pretty much their entire lives that they would someday be wedded with each other. They were ready to make their dreams come true, so they sat down with George and Nellie. They started making some arrangements. Now, John, at the time, he confessed to Abigail he couldn't marry her quite yet. There was still some business he had to settle down with over in Cripple Creek. But he swore to her the day he would return, that would be the day they would wed. So they planned it out. They marked a day on the calendar. This would be the day John would return. And so they set their plans into motion. John left, and with the help of George and Nellie, Abigail prepared and organized the whole wedding. Now, the day of the wedding, happiest day of her life. It's a beautiful spring day. She's wearing a lovely gown with a long flowing veil. She's greeting all the wedding guests outside the cave entrance as they come. They're all dear friends and family members. However, John had yet to show up. Now, at the time, she was lenient on this because she knew he was coming all the way from Cripple Creek, basically by horse and wagon. Those things aren't always reliable. She was really lenient on him being just a little late. But the hours started to drag by. There was still no word of him, and the wedding guests become impatient. They start to leave the cave, thinking that poor Abigail, she was left at the altar. And she refused to believe this because John, he was always true to his word. So she leaves the cave, and she waits for him just outside the cave exit. She keeps her eyes open on the mountain road, searching for any sign of him. And so when the sun is now setting beyond the horizon, this is when she finally sees a man on horseback riding up towards the cave. Now, at first she's relieved because she believes this is John. But it's not him. It's a messenger on horseback from the telegraph office. Now, he called for Abigail, handed her a telegraph. When she read it, her whole world came to an end. It simply read, "We regret to inform you, John was in a carriage accident. He did not survive. Peace be with you, Abigail." As you can imagine, this poor woman couldn't find peace. This was her best friend, the love of her life. Her beloved John was gone. He died the day they were supposed to wed. She's beside herself in grief. And George and Nellie, they did everything they could to console her, but in the end, Abigail said that she just wanted to be left alone in the cave. George and Nellie saw that she needed time to grieve. So they consented. They gave her a lantern with some provisions so she could spend one night in here. And so she spent her night in the cave, but the next morning she hadn't come out. George and Nellie had to go into the cave. They had to search for her. Now, the last place they searched was the Fairy Bridal Chamber. It was the last place they expected her to be. So they make their way through the tunnel, they enter the room, and that's where they found Abigail's lifeless body floating above the ground. She'd taken her wedding veil and turned it into a noose. She couldn't bear being in this life a moment longer without her John. She was hoping to cross over to the other side so she could be with him. But when she did this, her spirit is now trapped in a state of perpetual mourning. Her spirit can't cross over. She is still stuck in the Fairy Bridal Chamber, to be in that cold, dark room forever alone. And she is mad. Not with any of us, with herself. Because she knows what she did to herself, she will never be able to go back to the other side. She'll never see her John or the rest of her family. Now, when we all come into the cave in the beginning, everything's all right because she believes people are coming here to visit her. But when we leave the cave, when you walk past that tunnel, you can sense eyes watching you from the darkness. Others can hear a woman sobbing down there. What's happening is Abigail is watching you get to leave this cave, knowing that you're going to go to a home where there's a loving family waiting for you. Others walk past that tunnel and they end up with scratch marks on their skin. Clothing is torn. Abigail is envious on what you all have, and she wants you to understand her pain. Now, she knows me. She knows I'm always coming back into the cave. I'm bringing more people for her to see. And my soul is just as bitter and broken as hers. But as for the rest of you, she knows you're not going to come back.
those squats at the gym.
You don't go to the gym. Don't lie.
Abby, you down there? For some reason, it's usually not as paranormal as we would think it would be.
Bye, Abby. My pants are falling down back there.
I know, I seen it. Ouch. Damn. I keep hitting my head. This is so low. Yeah. Okay, I better turn around. I can't see it.
So they're, as I said, they are called the lampshade spider. You can't see the perfect web here. I think he's still making it. Basically, the webs are kind of shaped like a lampshade, and they hang down from the middle. And,
Oh, that's okay, right?
we're all
Wait,
found a
look at
cave
it.
spider.
Cave spider.
So he's right up in here. So watch your head as you go underneath him. And he's just gonna go around. I hear Gail up ahead. I think she would
huge,
love
dude.
to
Look at
know
him.
I
about
can't
you.
see him.
Oh my god.
We're okay. We all have our own electric lights, so it's cool. Oh, okay. Oh, Gail, up ahead here is a cave spider. Yeah, he's up there. So.
I don't know if I can even see him on my camera.
Okay, here's some more webs. Is there any?
Look, Mom, a spider. I don't know. I don't see it.
You don't, he's right there.
I see it, but I don't see it on my camera.
You guys make it?
Yeah.
Get eaten by the spider?
Yes.
He was trying to see if he could see it. I didn't know if it was showing up on his camera.
Yeah, I don't know if it showed up on mine either. I got real close just in case.
Ow.
Okay, make sure you're balancing the gate before attempting the staircase.
Sorry, fam, for this big blue butt in my face. At least you have underwear on.
That's right.
Right up this way. So I'll just take these lanterns from all of you.
Thank God. Ouch. Hit my head one more time. One last
I'll take the
time.
lantern from you.
Thank you.
Cool. Alright. And I am closing the gates.
This is George's coffin?
No, that is basically our own shelf for where we keep the supplies for all of our lanterns. Don't ask me who was in there before we turned it into a shelf. We have no idea who the old previous owner was. But we have Frank who likes to hang out in here. Speaking of which, Frank, can I have my water bottle back? My water bottle. Thank you, Frank. Jeez. So, that was the lantern tour. Now, on these tours, the two guys like to give you an experience. So on these experiences, we hope that you have fun and that you had a good scare in there at the same time, and that you come out with your own personal experience here in the lantern tour that we'd like to share with everybody in the future. And maybe your stories will one day be said and told here on our lantern tours in the future. So I hope you guys all enjoyed yourselves here.
Yeah,
That was good.
Thank you.
Sweet.
Alright, you guys, that is it. This was so much fun. I want to thank Cave of the Winds for letting us do this special tour. We even talked to them about maybe doing an overnight here. That's a possibility, we know. Smash that like button if you'd like to see that. We want to thank Jim from Cave of the Winds and Kat, who gave us the tour. She was so great. If you guys come to the Cave of the Winds, make sure you ask for Kat when you do the lantern tour. It was so much fun. Anyway, make sure you guys have, if you haven't already, go check out Aiden, wherever he is. There he is, Aiden from Aiden's Escapades. His link will be in the description. And Rachel, she doesn't have a channel, but smash the like button if you like Rachel.
Great. Now you're not gonna get any likes.
Anyway guys, we'll see you next time. I love you guys.